Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kaylin Nagel. I'm the Open Educational Resource Program Manager at the Michelson 20 Million Minds Foundation, which is dedicated to ensuring that everyone, particularly our most vulnerable populations, have access to equitable post-secondary educational opportunities that lead to meaningful careers. Thank you all for joining us. Across the world, librarians, students, educators, advocates, and institutions are spending this week drawing attention to the high cost of course materials and the potential of open educational resources in celebration of Open Education Week. For the past 6 years, I've worked as a community organizer on college campuses, a researcher on the textbook affordability issue, and an advocate for open educational resources and a fair course material landscape. I do this work because I believe that knowledge is one of our most valuable resources because it has a unique trait. It becomes more valuable the more people that use it and have access to it. Over 10 years ago, Dr. Gary Michelson, the founder of the 20 Million Minds Foundation, read a newspaper story about students at Santa Ana Community College having to choose between completing their degree or dropping out because they couldn't afford the cost of textbooks. This was an obviously senseless barrier to these students. They had come so far and worked so hard only to be shut out by the high cost of course materials. So he contributed to a scholarship to help these students get what they needed. But funding individual students, while necessary, wasn't going to solve the overarching problems students were facing. Looking for enduring solutions to the course material affordability crisis, Dr. Michelson learned of an open textbook project out of Rice University called OpenStax. He became their first funder, and since then, OpenStax has found more supporters and saved over 6 million students more than $1.7 billion. They were able to do this because their high quality materials are offered for free because of their open copyright license. This open license also allows faculty to customize and update the materials and resources to better suit their educational needs, adding chapters or updating information with the latest research. But when I say the course material affordability crisis, I'm not using those words lightly. Textbook costs have increased at 3 times the rate of inflation from the 1970s until 2016. And while that meteoric climb has finally leveled off, those high costs remain. How did we get to this point? The textbook marketplace is fundamentally broken. 3 companies control 80% of the textbook marketplace. And the rules of supply and demand just don't work the same way that other places do. For example, the people who purchase the materials, this case, the students, don't have a choice on what materials are assigned. This creates a perfect storm. Today, we're joined by those who are impacted by this crisis and are trying to solve it. California has been on the forefront of making a more affordable course material landscape for decades through open educational resource supported programs like the Zero Textbook Cost Degree programs at the California community colleges, the Affordable Learning Solutions Project at the CSUs, and initiatives like LibreText at UC Davis. There are also California laws requiring instructors take the cost of materials into consideration when choosing them. Most recently, the state of California's historic investment of $115 million to reinvigorate the incredibly successful CCC Zero Textbook Cost Degree program. These are all steps in the right direction, but according to a 2020 US PIRG survey of students, 65% of students continue to skip purchasing course materials due to cost. We still have some work to do. I am going to introduce the panelists now, and then we're going to jump into the conversation with the last 15 minutes reserved for audience questions and answers. So please submit your questions for the panelists in the Q&A feature. First, I want to introduce Krishan Malhotra. He is the Vice President of Legislative Affairs at the California State University Student Association. Jasmine Prasad is the Vice President of Legislative Affairs at the California Community College Student Senate. Judy Radke pardon me, I apologize. Trudy Radke is the Open Educational Resource Program Manager at the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, called SPARC, and also was the formerly the Education Technology Specialist at Imperial Valley College. And then James Galapa-Grossklag is the Dean of Technology at College of the Canyons. So I am going to launch into our questions now, but I want to also thank all of our panelists for joining us and sharing their experiences. So first, I want to start with a pretty broad question, primarily for the student leaders. Can y'all share an experience, or have you had an experience where you weren't able to afford the materials? And how did that impact your ability to perform in that class?
Okay, I think I'll go first by the look Krishan is giving me. But yeah, so last semester I took real estate at my community college, so both my community college, and the textbooks cost like $125, and I took 3 real estate classes. So I obviously did not buy any of the books because they were super expensive. But every time we did a discussion post, I had to kind of Google some of the cases revolved around real estate and put like 2 sentences to the best of my knowledge what I found off of Google, compared to when I did a political science class and my professor had an online textbook for us that was free, and I had like a paragraph for my discussion post because it was just a lot easier to pull information from that free textbook and to apply it back into the discussion post and respond to students, because I could actually comprehend what we were talking about since I didn't have to stress financially about buying 3 $125 books. I'll pass it to Krishan though.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Personally, I haven't had the experience of not being able to afford a textbook. However, from what I've heard from my fellow students, it adds a lot of pressure and stress to an already pressureful and stressful environment. Not only do you have to worry about getting grades and making sure your academics and your GPA is high, then you have to worry about making sure your job is going to give you enough hours to cover the book that you need to buy. So then you have time to read that book, which is probably too long. It's too big. There's too much to cover. So it just continues to add stress and pressure to an environment that we're already, stressed and pressured under. So it's a huge barrier when we can't afford those textbooks. And like Jasmine was saying, it hinders our grades and our ability to do as well as possible.
Caitlin, if I may add, our students face not only the choice between purchasing commercial textbooks and not having access to the textbooks, but there's also this gray area in the middle that that maybe not Christian and Jasmine engage in, but many students engage in, and that is outright criminal behavior by utilizing pirated texts. It's a dirty secret. We really don't talk about it very much, but most of the students I know, it never occurs to them to purchase the commercial text because they know that they can engage in criminal behavior and access pirated texts. And it's unfortunate that institutionally, or we as higher education, that we place our students in a position in which they feel as though the only choice they have to succeed in their education is to engage in criminal behavior. That's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I know that is something that I have spoken with students about, and you shouldn't have to break the law to get the things you need to succeed. And I wanted to circle back because one of the things Jasmine was talking about was having access to that textbook and just the difference that made when it came to your level of participation. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that experience and how, if having that access to materials, how would that change your ability to participate in your classes?
Yeah, so for like my political science class, and I took a poli-sci class, I think the spring, right when the pandemic hit, unfortunately. But in my philosophy class, we had to use this textbook that was, free for the students as well. And it is one of my favorite books. Sometimes I just read when I'm bored about philosophers, and I'm not super into philosophy whatsoever. But oftentimes in political science classes, we have to think about political philosophers and what were their ideas when, coming up with these things to incorporate different political aspects. And so I actually used that philosophy book in one of my essays. And my professor said, like, this is really good resources. I love how you tied it into our assignment and what we've learned in class. And I actually got an A, and that was the essay that I've been most proud of in my college career, because I absolutely love that book. And I had a fun time writing an essay because I like that book, and I hate essays. I do not like writing them because they take so long, but that one I am proud of still to this day. Sometimes I look at it when I'm stressed about doing essays. I'm like, okay, this one's perfect. Let's try and do that again with some other resources and see where we can get at.
So we keep saying the word textbook, but what is a textbook these days? What are the materials that students are expected to buy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think something that's changed since I started at a community college when I was in high school. Even back then, it was mostly physical textbooks. But as I've advanced through my educational career, which that was only 5 years ago to be realistic, but every single class that I enroll in now, we're looking at buying access codes and digital textbooks where we log into either Pearson or McGraw-Hill's website, purchase a $125 20-digit code to enter into their website, purchased by them to access the materials that they wrote. So it's a little bit of a broken system if you think about it that way, but realistically, we don't even get anything physical in return. We purchase an access code, which we can do online, enter that code, and we have access to that book for the next usually 4 to 6 months. It's very insulting. We purchase the material, but we don't even get anything physical in return, and we don't get to keep it once that semester or designated period of time has expired. At least back when I bought physical textbooks, I could still find them, in my room on my bookshelf. So it's not really anything physical anymore. It's all online based, and that's where we do our homework, we do our assignments, we do our quizzes and exams sometimes as well.
Yeah, if I can add to that, and Bridget just pointed this out in the chat, not only are the access codes these time bombs that expire and blow up and leave our students with nothing, but also all of the clicks and all of the data that the students are producing by being inside the publisher's platform is data that the publishers collect, or surveillance that the publishers collect. They change that surveillance into data, and then they approach people like me and say, hey, can we sell you this data? It will help you to support your students in a more effective way, because we know exactly what students are doing. We know that if Krishan clicks on this button, he's more likely to get an A or a B, and so on. When what's happening is that the publishers are trying to sell to us the data that we're forcing students to produce. It's a very, again, a broken system.
I just wanted to add on to that. When in my previous position, when I was the Affordable Textbooks Campaign Director at US PER, we did a national survey of students on textbook affordability. And one of the questions that we asked was, what is your understanding of how your data is used on a scale of 1 to 10? With 10 being, I could explain it to someone who doesn't know technology, and 1 being, you're collecting my data. And the average was 2. So out of curiosity, Krishan, Jasmine, have you all thought about the way your data is being used by publishers? Is this something that has come up for you before?
That smile, I know he wants me to go first. Yeah, so it's actually something I never thought of before, and I don't think like our professor, or at least my professors, have ever brought it up. Like, this is what our data is being used for, and like when we access a textbook, like what that kind of does for like our privacy settings. But for the online access code, I will say, not helpful for students. So we have to buy the hard copy and the access code. Absolutely hate that, but it's fine if I get an A, I guess.
Honestly, I don't think it's something that a majority of people even think about, let alone students. We're a little busy dealing with grades and school and our social life and our home responsibilities, our family responsibilities, getting a job, keeping a job, probably a billion other things. So I think data privacy, especially right now, even for the average American, the average person in the world, is pretty close to the bottom of the list. And hopefully it's something in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see a shift where people want to own their own data, which is what I think we should be able to do. So yeah, I know Trudy had something to add on as well.
I decided it was best to wait my turn since that question was directed at the students. But Kaylin, just kind of to touch on this point of data, and you guys have all made really excellent points. So in my previous role as an education technology specialist, I was responsible for ed tech acquisitions at my institution. So part of my job professionally was to read contracts that these ed tech companies were offering. They're offering their services to us. I'm reading those contracts. I'm combing them for how are they going to use our students' data? How is that going to operate? What are they going to use? What's the potential of a breach? Like, what is your security platform? How protected is that data really? And I did this professionally. So as a professional, I was doing this, and it's still hard to understand all of the contract language. And then once you do understand it and you dig into it, there's a lot of potential for misuse of student data. And I think that it behooves us to mention and to talk about how these companies who want to turn a profit, and that's their prerogative. I would say that they're not very conscientious about student data. They're not being careful. I was in a conversation with someone who works for a state representative the other day, and they were interacting with an ed tech company, and the ed tech company was trying to sell them on this piece of data. And they said, look at how well these students are doing. And they were showing student grades attached to names to this rep, which is a FERPA violation. And that's just an anecdotal story that I heard in passing. I have more like it. So this is really a huge concern. It's something we should be talking about. And as you mentioned, Kayla, I used that PERG stat in a presentation yesterday. Students aren't aware of their data, the way it's being used. I'm a professional, I do this professionally, and it's even hard for me to understand. I'm constantly clicking, I accept terms and conditions just to use an application, and I'm not reading all the language. So I think this should be kind of the new frontier of what we're focusing on in terms of data collection from ed tech and from course materials as well.
So this is something that I think is a new concept to a lot of people. So I always think it's worth pausing on. But to get back a little bit to the affordability, right? When it comes to what do materials look like? There's so many things students are expected to buy these days. Does anyone have anything else that they wanted to add on to that question before we move on?
I think just very briefly, and I know that Jasmine and Krishan already did touch on this, but there's the courseware for homework. I think it is really serious that we're asking students to purchase a book. And then oftentimes, as was mentioned, there's that access code on top of a book to do their homework. And this especially I know is impacting STEM majors a lot. So they've got to buy this homework platform. So now they're mandatory. They have to buy these two different platforms, often from the same publisher. And they're often, even if they're bundled, it's a separate price. And that you can look at anywhere upwards of $250 just for that book and that access code. So it's like pinging them twice when textbook prices are already gouging them. And if they don't purchase that access code, it's not like Jasmine is clearly a very creative student. She was like, I'm going to figure out a way around having to purchase these extremely expensive textbooks. If it's a homework application, there's no way to submit your homework outside of using that courseware. You have to use it. You're just going to take the fail on that. You're just not going to get the grade you need. You're just going to fail in that homework assignment if you cannot afford to purchase the courseware access code.
And I wanted to touch on something. You mentioned that Jasmine's very creative, which I agree. But in my experience, that is almost universally true among students. Students have always been incredibly creative when it comes to how to access the materials that they need. What are some ways that students can save money on traditional textbooks, or at least they have historically been able to?
If it's a physical copy of something, I can call my friend who took the class last year and say, hey, it might be, now a generation or an edition older, but pretty much the exact same thing. That's the benefit of getting social in college, I think, is being able to have those exchanges, those swaps. Most of the time, by the time I'm done with the physical textbook at the end of the semester, I don't even want to look at it anymore. So I'm looking to get rid of it. I don't care if it's for nothing. I don't care if it's for super cheap. Just get it out of my, off my bookshelf, out of my desk, wherever it needs to go, out of my backpack when I used to have physical textbooks. So that's the benefit, I think, of getting and staying social. having friends in your major is like, hey, do you have this book? That used to work. But as we get more digital, I can't share an access code. I can't share a login. It's tied to me specifically.
Yeah, and I know like a lot of times students will rent out the textbooks to the campus because it's cheaper than buying a brand new one. However, like as times change and like new issues arise, and depending on your major, like for sociology, we had to get a new edition every year. So every year there's like a new textbook, and we couldn't ask the previous classmates like, oh, can I use your textbook, or like, can you send me pictures, because we had to get the latest edition, even though we're talking about things that happened in the past and like how to prevent it, and like being more aware of what's happening socially and like how to advocate to make sure that doesn't happen in the future. But we're still buying new textbooks, and I never used the textbook for my sociology class. I didn't even buy it because I was like, yeah, I'm not buying the newest edition, that's expensive. I did buy like the reading book we had to get, which is what the tests were based on compared to the actual textbook. So I'm glad I didn't waste that money, but I feel bad for the students that actually did, because I mean, oftentimes we're kind of lied to with that. So we always have to find other ways. Sometimes looking on the website if we can download something for free, or even renting through Amazon. I know I did that a couple times, which was extremely helpful. But yeah, I agree with Krishan. I don't like having my textbooks. I still have one from like my criminal justice class, and I just stare at it like I hated that class so much. But it's okay. I learned a lot. It helps with poli-sci, I guess.
So we talked a little bit about like the ways that students have been able to save money historically. Some of the things that I know I've seen is everything from Facebook groups where students can say, I have this book, who wants it? To, I know that a lot of libraries will have copies on reserve that students can go and check out for a period of time. Of course, all of those things become impossible when they shift to completely online textbooks. I know that some of y'all might have experience with like the struggles that libraries have had with acquiring copies for the students to access. Does anyone want to speak on that?
Kaylin, I'll speak to that. One of my areas of responsibility at College of the Canyons is the library, our academic library. So in years past, our library would receive from our instructors physical copies of textbooks that students could check out on a limited basis, as you mentioned. However, with the textbooks moving to complete digital formats and during the pandemic, textbook publishers, commercial publishers have simply refused to do business with academic libraries to provide reserve copies. So, for example, we've asked commercial publishers, please, can you during the pandemic, can you please provide us with electronic access to digital copies of your textbooks, so that we can give access to our students in the similar way that students would access on a limited basis physical textbooks. And commercial publishers simply refuse. They don't want to do business with academic libraries during the pandemic. They want to force students to purchase electronic copies or electronic access codes. And we know this is well documented that commercial publishers want to do everything they can to eliminate the used textbook market and eliminate the ability of students to share books, as Jasmine and Krishan were talking about.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about like what's wrong. I want to shift a little bit to start talking about some things that are being done to solve this. So the thing I have, of course, most excited about is the role that open educational resources play in reducing textbook costs and building access to course materials. But open educational resources is a mouthful. Does anyone want to give a definition as something just to get everybody on the same page of what we mean? I can definitely do it. So an open educational resource is a material that's written under an open copyright license. This means that people who wrote it intend it for it to be used and shared. They also often intend it for it to be adapted to better suit the needs of those classes. So imagine a geography or geology textbook that uses California's landscape to illustrate what they're talking about, so students can recognize things in the material or reflect the experiences of the students in that classroom. It means that people can keep it in perpetuity. So for example, what Jasmine was talking about of being able to keep that philosophy book all the way up, even after she transferred to the CSUs and has been dual enrolled in both the CCCs and CSUs, using that in upper division classes. It means that it can be shared without consequence. So a faculty member can just email it to all of their students and they're not breaking copyright law, and that it's free, that students can access it and faculty can access it forever for free. So this year, Governor Newsom and the legislature approved $115 million to support grants to colleges to develop zero textbook cost pathways. We were involved in the first round. So there were people involved in the first round as ETC funding, and they did a really excellent job. I know James played a really huge role in it. Can you tell us a little bit about what y'all were able to accomplish with this first round of funding and what you hope this new round will accomplish?
Sure. Thank you, Kaylin. Yeah, in 2016, the California State Legislature allocated $5 million to a program to provide competitive grants to our community colleges. College of the Canyons was honored to play a role supporting those colleges together with good friends at West Hills College Lemoore. Trudy also played a role in supporting those colleges in their work. Based on what the colleges themselves told us, that original $5 million investment from the taxpayers of California would saved students $42 million. That adds up to an 800% return on investment. The colleges tell us that over a 3-year period, 31,000 students were able to benefit from all the OER zero cost courses that were created based on research that the colleges engaged in. We know that in all the classes that were using these materials that were created, the grades of A went up significantly, the grades of D and F went down significantly. So we know that taxpayers were saving money and students were getting better grades and learning more. It's just amazing.
And then with this new round of funding, what could that mean for the community colleges overall?
Wow. Well, first of all, we hope that the program that emerges from this funding will honor the vision of Governor Newsom. When Governor Newsom announced this historic investment, he said, I'm going to quote here, he said, "We want to deal with the racket that is the textbook industry that is abusive to common sense in terms of the usury nature of the costs. They make no sense whatsoever, except to those that are the beneficiaries of huge rewards on the backs of our children." So again, we hope that the program that emerges honors the governor's vision by prioritizing open educational resources, supporting colleges to create complete degree programs, complete certificate programs that are sustainable, so that faculty, as you said, Kaylin, with your definition of OER, so that faculty and institutions all across California, but outside of California, can reuse the materials so that they can share the materials. They can update the materials, particularly in our career education areas, so that they can create materials that reflect the realities of our students. Our students can participate in co-creation of the materials. It's just phenomenal. The last thing that we want to see happen is that let's say that the commercial publishers are invited to the table to determine how this historic investment is going to be spent. That would not honor the vision of the governor.
And I wanted to also, so OER plays a pretty big role in ZTC, obviously. But what role does OER creation and adoption play in academic freedom? Because I know that that is something that comes up very often, and rightly so.
Wow, for me, it's the ultimate in academic freedom. Go back to the comment of Krishan earlier that he's paying an access code to get into a publisher platform to read materials and study with materials created by this commercial publisher. That's not a faculty member at Krishan's institution. Exercising academic freedom and demonstrating your disciplinary expertise is choosing open educational resources and creating open educational resources. Goodness, if you as a faculty member are qualified enough to be hired and go into the classroom and open your mouth and lecture, you're more than qualified to write the materials. It's the ultimate academic freedom.
And then
But
Trudy,
also, yeah, I did. Is that okay, Caitlin? Do we have time for?
of course, yeah.
Awesome. So I just want to add really quickly to what James said. First of all, completely agree with that, James. That was an excellent way of putting it. It really is the ultimate academic freedom for faculty to be able to create their own learning materials. So we're talking about academic freedom and what faculty have a right to do in their own classroom, which I think is crucial. It's crucial to have these conversations, and it's crucial to trust our faculty much more than a publisher who's located hundreds of miles away, who isn't aware of our cultural context, who isn't aware of our students and their context. How much more responsive are those learning materials going to be? So basically what I just wanted to add to this was that students, in my experience, really notice, they care, and they buy into their learning materials when they see themselves reflected in them. So not only is this an academic freedom question, absolutely, it's also allowing our professors and faculty to do the best they can do to educate our students. And when students see names that reflect their names in their textbooks, when students see geography that reflects their geography in their textbooks, I worked with a geography professor to develop a textbook actually at College of the Canyons, and he used pictures from around the community. He would take his students on field trips to Death Valley, pre-pandemic, of course, and he would use pictures from those previous field trips in his books. So students were seeing their friends from like a year ago in their learning materials. Students absolutely notice that, and they get more out of that. They're more invested in their own learning, and that's really the concept here of open. It's not just that we're creating a free material for the student. That's the starting point. Now students are realizing the potential to see themselves in their own learning materials, to contribute to these learning materials themselves. Their own experiences going in there. That's extremely powerful, and that's education in a nutshell.
So what steps can be taken to make OER creation and adoption more sustainable across the California community colleges, and even if you all want to expand beyond that too?
Well, I'll say how fantastic that Krishan and Jasmine are here. They play the crucial role. They and their organizations play the crucial role to advocate within their institutions and across the state for more use of open educational resources, but in a way that recognizes the good work of the professors who are already choosing open educational resources. Say thank you to those who are already using it, lift them up, amplify their message, write them thank you notes, publicize them through social media, and reward them for the good choices that they're making.
I also want to add, I think it's important to bring light and just kind of talk more about OER in general. I think a lot of our students, a lot of our faculty, maybe too, even are just kind of used to, oh, I can just assign this access code. Oh, I just have to buy this access code. And that's kind of it. I think it's sort of like the easy way out. And if we talk more about OER and we can discuss the benefits and the advantages and why it's better than McGraw-Hill or Pearson and the expensive books, it will help shift and make more people use it. Also, I think maybe having that discussion with our faculty, potentially at our academic senate levels, at least for myself and Jasmine in the California community colleges, we could definitely bring OER as maybe something that they begin to prioritize statewide. I know across our 23 campuses, it would be quite the effort to implement given just the amount of faculty and the amount of sections and the amount of classes that we offer, but definitely starting the conversation and making the shift slowly, right? We made the shift from physical textbooks to digital textbooks. We can make the shift from digital textbooks to OER.
Yeah, and to kind of go off of Krishan, I think it is really beneficial for students to have OER and for faculty to take note of how much it helps students with their grades and their education. I think oftentimes, like Krishan says, since they're just used to handing out access and making the students kind of put in more of the effort of the resources they have to get for the class, they oftentimes, forget how much like the students actually want to learn, but it's a matter of like the professor engaging and like having something that they can relate to when reading, as Trudy mentioned, like the geography professor had stuff around their area, so it's more engaging for the students. But there was also a question about like how to create books that students love and like want to read again. So like as Trudy mentioned, just having something where students can relate to more and that's engaging for the class is extremely beneficial. I know for I do not like school. I'm ready to graduate, but if the class is engaging and like a professor actually cares about the students and I can see that, then it makes me want to try that much harder in school and actually like participate in discussions, learn more, do more research if I'm lost, or like reach out to the professor about something. And also just like OER in general, the more that professors work towards that, not only benefits students, but I know like oftentimes it makes it easier for a professor to get tenure. So it's really like, it's a win-win situation. And especially for the students, like we saw a decrease in enrollment recently, and a lot of that is because like we don't have access to a lot of resources we need for higher education because it's extremely expensive. We all know that tuition is not the full cost of college. We have to pay for the other need-based necessities. And so if we have access to OER where students don't have to pay for textbooks, then there would be, you know, more increasement because students aren't stressing financially. They can have access and see that college is a little bit more affordable for them. So hopefully like we'll see an increasement of enrollment rather than a decreasement. But that's from the student's perspective.
So 1,000% to everything that's been said so far. And also, I think, and James, you mentioned like acknowledging faculty, and Jasmine, you even made that comment on the tenure comment. I think that there's really good work that could be done at the institutional level to provide even more legitimacy to OER. So not only, you know, the OER movement has come so far in the past 10, 15 years. I think we're ready to take the next steps and say, not only is we know OER is a good idea, OER awareness is ever increasing. We need more all the time, but it's increasing. I think we can move now to a legitimacy stage of, can we fund our faculty to do OER? Can we offer course release, sabbaticals to develop OER? Can we say, what could be more student and equity centered than creating free, relatable, engaging content for your students? Could that be recognized as legitimate work as part of the tenure process? And I know these are large discussions and they're not going to happen overnight. We're going to have a big shift in our thinking. But I think free textbooks was a big shift in our thinking, right? So these things can take time, but I think that it behooves us to start having those conversations of how can we further legitimize OER at the institutional level, since so many faculty and students and administrators and librarians have done this grassroots work of legitimizing OER. How can institutions and people in power there come alongside and add that institutional support and legitimacy? I think that would seal the deal.
So we're going to shift to audience questions in just a couple minutes. So if you're an audience member who has a question, please use the Q&A feature. I would love to make sure that we can answer those. But I think I come out of the student advocacy world and like the student organizing world. So what role have students played in publicizing and winning OER victories? And what is the role that students are going to continue playing in the future? Why do students care about OER, and why are they getting involved? And how do y'all see yourself continuing in this space?
Yeah, I guess I'll go first. So as like mentioned previously, it shows that the professor kind of cares more about the students and what ways can help them focus in the class and keeps them engaged because, as mentioned, it helps the students. They're putting in the effort to make that resource accessible towards them and making college more affordable. And that alone is so impactful to students because it really shows the professor cares and they want to continue their class. And also, it's just easier to learn from something that you can relate to like firsthand. So if there's a class that, specifically tailors to the area you're living in or the community, and they use examples from that, so it helps the students learn better. Obviously, that's a lot more resourceful than just buying a textbook that you never use. So I think that's some ways that it can help students just to engage them more and make it more relatable for them to comprehend in class.
I think too, an important part to add is that like real connection to the area, to the surrounding areas, even if it's just the state in general. If you're reading something that you can relate to, like I think Trudy said earlier, it kind of makes much more of a stronger connection rather than something in some other state or some other part of the world where, it doesn't hit as close to home, or it doesn't feel as personal. I think that's an important part of it too. And I think us as students, we first of all need to continue to talk about it and get the word out there that it's something that we're interested in. And with the research that we have, we need to say, hey, this is more helpful to us than the online digital access codes and textbooks that we've been using for the last 5 to 10, maybe even longer than that, years. So definitely starting there. And then someone mentioned in the chat too, making sure students are involved in creation of OER and making sure that their opinions and their perspectives and things that they've learned, they're also putting in those resources to help other students learn in the future.
Yeah, in addition, as going back to what Trudy was mentioning about, having students involved in OER, providing a way for faculty and students to work together so that students can see themselves in their instructional materials. If student organizations are advocating for projects that promote diversity on campus, or projects that promote equity on campus, that's not separate at all from OER. OER is a tool to help support your diversity and equity goals that your student organizations are probably already working on. So it's not like OER is over here with the affordability group and the diversity and equity group is over here doing something else entirely. They match perfectly, they blend perfectly, and OER is a tool to help achieve those other goals.
Yeah, James, absolutely. I completely agree. I think, and completely understandably, and even rightly so, there's been so much emphasis in this movement on the affordability aspect, because that's what students were calling for. They were like, we cannot even afford to learn. But like I said, at this point in the movement, I'm excited to dive even deeper into what students were really saying, which is, I want to learn and I can't because I can't afford the learning material. What's beyond affording? What's beyond just getting the book? It's reading the book. It's analyzing and synthesizing that information, right? Bloom's taxonomy. And then it's creating your own original piece of work. That's OER. This is absolutely an equity issue. We can actually bring our students in to content creation. We can have them actually producing something that they're in school, when they're in school, something that they can look back on, something that they can put on a resume. That's what we're really getting at here is not affordability. We start with that. Let's move into equity. And I think students are ready for that. And this is a student movement to start with. It really is, Kaylin. I appreciate you bringing this point up. Students know what they want. They just need a platform. And they are experts about their own needs. And I think that now we can, affordability, we're working on it. Let's go even past it. Let's do what the publishers can't do. And let's create truly equitable learning materials.
So I have a question from the audience. One of the faculty comments I received lately has been along the lines of, my students really like the publisher-backed materials that I used. I know it's expensive, but my students love it. Even when we show faculty that our student survey results show how many of our students are dropping out of classes because they can't, because of the cost of materials, or stay in the class but don't purchase the materials and earn a low grade. Yet there is still pushback. What suggestions do you offer to further showcase the need to consider the importance and legitimacy of zero textbook cost materials?
Yeah, so I have a decently good answer, and I'm sure Kershawn will probably add on, but I think this comment or this question is extremely important for students, because as being a student leader who advocates, especially on the legislative level between both of us, we often find through data that faculty members are not listening to students and how some resources that we're getting are beneficial and what aren't working for students. So I love this question, because I think faculty needs to pay attention more to what are some of the concerns that students are facing, and actually see, we want to put in effort to this class, but you're just not hearing us out. And if you go towards these resources, it will boost our educational GPA. It will get more students engaged. And I know times have changed over the years from when professors were in college to when students are in college now. And I was recently on a panel with the president of Academic Senate for community college, and she tried enrolling to a class and realized that yes, times have changed. Prices have gone up for students. way back in the day, it used to be free college. Obviously, that's not the case anymore. So just realizing how much has changed for students and how expensive education truly is now, not just tuition, but all of the other necessities students need to learn, and actually paying attention to like OER is extremely beneficial. Any way that helps students obtain education more affordable for them is beneficial, and it will have the students more engaged because faculty's putting out those resources and showing they truly care about students. But I don't know if Krishan, you want to add on anything as a student?
I was just gonna say maybe survey the students rather than just taking the information directly from the faculty member, because again, I'm not saying that this is true for all faculty, but some of them, most people like to take the easy way out and do things the easy way. Maybe they're just saying that. We need to know what the students really think, right? Do they really like this expensive textbook if half of them are dropping the class because of it? Might be worth questioning. So definitely just look into that maybe too, and see what the data shows versus what the professor or the faculty member is telling you.
And another way I think about it is if you talk to a bunch of people who drive Ferraris, whether they're satisfied with a Ferrari, you probably get a pretty high response rate that, yeah, we like driving Ferraris. But if you talk to people who are walking and taking a bus, whether or not they want to wait until they have a Ferrari to get some sort of transportation, you might get a different answer.
If you're an audience member who has a question, please feel free, throw it in the Q&A. I wanted to ask a question though, because I know that we're running a little short on time. We only have a few minutes left. But if there's something you want to make sure that the attendees here today leave knowing, what is that?
I think from the community college perspective, and as one of the student leaders here, students' voices are important, and just listen to them more, please. I know on the legislative level, a lot of members, especially in the pandemic, in light of that, they have been realizing that college is not cheap anymore, and they've been allocating more funds and resources to help students to their education. So also encouraging faculty to just see the perspective as a student and like what we're going through rather than as a faculty member, because as the president of Academic Senate said, like things have changed. Seeing it through a new lens is extremely helpful, and then they realize like what a student truly goes through.
And also, I would say, just really, I agree with Jasmine. Just listen to us and try to empathize with our struggle. I'm sure a lot of people here have gone to college, they've pursued higher education, and things are completely different. Go to Pearson or McGraw-Hill's website and look at the classes that you took back in the day, whether that was 5 years ago, whether that was 20 years ago, and look and see what we have to pay, what we have to do versus what you have to do. And realize that not only is that gotten more expensive, but college in general, tuition, the affordability crisis, the total cost of attendance, all of that has increased. So this is not a problem that we're just making up. This is not a problem that we're just here to talk about because it's a small problem, but this costs our students millions and millions and millions of dollars for something that they can't even keep. They can't even get a physical copy for unless they want to pay another $100 or $150. So make sure that we're try to empathize with us, check it out and see what we're dealing with. And hopefully then you'll be a little bit more in tune with the modern college student and how we have to deal with the things that we have to deal with.
I guess a takeaway that I would put forth is, and I think it was kind of at the end of that last question, there was a comment about the legitimacy of zero textbook costs or OER. I think we're at the point in the movement where we've gained some really good traction. It's been around for a minute now. And in terms of legitimizing OER, like I was mentioning at the institutional level, like really putting a sustainability backing behind ZTC and OER. I would pose the question, why do we trust the publishers so very much with our learning materials? And I would say it's 3 reasons. It's expertise, time, and money. They have experts that have the time, and they fund those experts to write the textbooks. We have the experts. We are not short on experts in the California college system. I have seen that with my own eyes, working at many institutions across the state. What we do need is the time and the funding. And, those are not necessarily easy asks. So what I'm saying, I'm not, I guess I don't have the convenience that the textbook publishers have, right? It is a lift and that's worth acknowledging, that money is always tight in public education. But I think if we take the time to figure out at the institutional level, how can we find the time for our faculty? How can we fund our faculty? I think the return on investment for asking those questions at the institutional level and digging into those questions will be exponential, absolutely exponential. I think where we are, if we plow at this for 5-10 more years, we could really change the landscape of textbook affordability across the entire state. And I think that would make a world of difference for our students. And I think it's something worth tackling and something worth talking about now.
I'll just echo everything that Jasmine, Krishan, and Trudy have said, that our faculty, staff, and administrators across all of the community colleges, Cal States, and even UCs, they want to do the best that they can for our students, and they don't always have the support and the resources to do so. So thank you to Krishan and Jasmine and others who are advocating at the state level to get more resources for our faculty, staff, and administrators to do this kind of work. It's equally as important that each of us here raises our voice at our own institutions to constantly remind everyone around us that we don't have to accept the way the world is right now, where learning materials and responsibility for learning is outsourced to private industry and third parties. We institutions, we educators can exercise control over what our learning materials look like and support our students to the best of our ability.
So I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning, especially the panelists. And if you have any further questions, or you want to learn a little bit more about some of the things you've heard today, I encourage you to reach out to myself. I just put my email in the chat, or any of the panelists if they want to share contact information as well, if they feel comfortable. I welcome them to do so. But California is fortunate to have some of the very best institutions of higher learning in the world. Education is something that once we have, just can't be taken from you and has the power to truly transform lives. So we have to make sure that we're living up to that promise, but we have to do that by making sure every student can access what they need to succeed. So we're going to post the recording from today's discussion on our YouTube channel, the Michelson 20 Million Minds Foundation, by tomorrow. The video is going to include information that you heard here today. And if you want to learn more or want to stay up to date, we do have a newsletter that you can access at 20mm.org to receive updates. And I want to thank everyone here for joining and learning more about this during Open Education Week.